Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's show, we welcome dboyes from Today's Class. David is the president at Today's Class, and he and his team are doing some really innovative things as it relates to training. We've been trying to have this one for a while, David. I'm really happy to have you on and excited to dive into Today's Class.
Glad to be here.
All right, so let's start by learning about you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and really how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. So my name's dboyes with Today's Class. I've been with Today's Class since 2017. Let me adjust my mic a little bit here. My background had been more in the software and consulting and integration space. So not an automotive aftermarket guy by trade. However, with my background in software, as I came into Today's Class, given we were an online training solution, I tried to bring my skills to look at some of the problems that we are facing as an organization and look at things a little differently. So what we do generally is, as we're providing online training to automotive shops, we're trying to do it in a little different way. The organization had historically been focused on training, initially as an instructor-led training group, and then moving into a traditional online training course-based solution. But in the past few years, we've tried to look at things a little differently, use some new software techniques and different ways to engage our audience to kind of shift things into a new space.
And it's really cool what you guys are doing. Now, I'm interested in learning, how did you know about Today's Class prior to joining Today's Class?
All right, so I'm a second generation person, which I think a lot of folks can relate to. My dad had got engaged with Today's Class in one of its previous iterations in the late 90s. He had been in education for a long time, more at the college level, but always linked to automotive. We're originally from Michigan, and anybody listening here might be familiar with General Motors Institute, or now it's kind of evolved a couple times. But my dad went there, was an administrator there. I went there, so automotive and education was always kind of part of what was in our world. And then in the late 90s, he got engaged with the organization, and through it into the early 2000s, instructor-led training was really the core of the business. And then it shifted into more of an online world. And so building courses and curriculums in automotive, but then in other career and tech ed areas, where for many years the core customers of Today's Class were schools and state level departments of education. And we had presence in Mississippi and North Carolina and Virginia and lots of other spaces. And during that time, kind of shifted away from the aftermarket. So in parallel, early 2000s or so as my career was getting started. Again, I did more of the software related items, primarily in supply chain to start, but then did other things in utilities and healthcare. But my overall view was that there's some cool stuff that we can do with software to better support an audience or an operation to try and make things more efficient. And then, my dad was really aging out of the business. I mean, he was still running the business into his early 80s. And it really wasn't on my radar to get involved from a family business perspective. But the way it worked out, it just seemed like there was a good opportunity to bring me in. And for me, it was a good opportunity to see if we could do something different. So there's certainly some risk involved there. And I had a lot to learn as I came in. But it's been a pretty fun ride so far. We've kind of shifted our core business away from schools back to the aftermarket and are trying to do some new and different things from a technology perspective, which personally I find really exciting, but we're also sticking to our roots as well. So that's kind of the backstory. And my dad ended up retiring in 2019, I think. A lot of our core staff has stayed on. We've separated from the educational side of things, now focus primarily or entirely on the professional markets, and added some staff here and there. But that's really how it came to be over the past few years.
It's funny because I did not know that the second generation part, and I think as you're explaining it, you see why the evolution took place, and I think it's just a really cool thing that here you are coming up with a background in software, and then your father having the background in education, and being able to tie the two together in a way that evolves the company. I think it's almost just kind of a like a perfect fit in a lot of ways, where you were able to see different industries. Even I think I've had folks on the past, and just even in general conversations, I think there's so much value in seeing what other industries do, in bringing that back into the automotive aftermarket to be able to make it better, right? And I think just all of your background being able to tie into what you're doing at today's class is really had a huge impact, because we've seen the evolution over the years. And I think it's a really cool shift. Now, out of curiosity, how hard was that shift, going from focusing on education to more of the professional side? Because it is maybe a little different demographic, a little different way of going about business in general.
Yeah, so where it started was with our legacy product. We wanted to begin selling that back to the aftermarket again, and we kept running into common questions. So if we had, curriculum on, let's say, brakes and electrical, how do we sell this to a shop? Does somebody take this brakes course one time? What if they get an 80%? Does that mean that they know it all? What about the 20% they didn't know? Do they ever take it again? So those are the types of things that, like, for almost from a business perspective initially, like, how do we even package this and make this usable to a shop? So those questions continued. And on the school side, we kind of were business as usual. Our technology was aging out and so forth, and we saw that the opportunity was probably more on the professional side for us, but it triggered us to essentially reinvent what we do. So essentially we launched a separate product. So we had our school-focused product and our professional product, and that was tricky for a while. We had to kind of juggle a lot of things and kind of create this new line of business. However, the benefit was we had something steady that we could rely on. About 2 years ago, we sold the school-focused part of the business to another organization that's really focused on career and tech ed, and that's allowed us to focus on purely on the professional side of things. I guess the other thing is it allowed us to have a foundation with which to start. So we had an automotive curriculum already. We had accreditation with ASE. We had experience there. So it gave us, I'd say, a good boost to kind of get rolling, back into the professional world.
How hard of a call was it to sell off the educational side? I'm sure it's not something that doesn't come without a bunch of thought behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that made it, there were a couple key pieces to it. I mean, one was that our technology on the education side was aging. We had a choice to either sell it off or make some significant investment into essentially rebuilding it. So for example, some folks might remember like flash animations from 7 or 8 years ago. Like we had a lot of flash that we had phased out, but the demands were changing. And schools now, with all of the online resources that they have, they require a lot of integrations, with Google Classroom or Blackboard and these other services. And those are things that our legacy technology were not super equipped to handle. So it wasn't an easy decision, but I mean, the cards are kind of stacked in the favor of, there was another organization, they based out of Texas, named ICEV. They were looking to incorporate automotive into their program, and they had made the investments to be better prepared for the future. So like our constraints there, also with the opportunity to kind of move forward in this area that we thought was really where our passion was, made it kind of the pieces fell into place. I don't want to say it was an easy call, but the path was pretty well set for us. So we were very fortunate to work with the folks at ICEV. It was a great fit, great handoff, and I think it's worked out for both parties.
That's great. And looking at the opportunity on the aftermarket side, I think it was probably pretty obvious, and maybe hindsight, maybe not as much, but now for sure, where you look at it, and I think so many independent shops are looking for that additional training. And a lot of times it's really, really hard to find that training. And it is a competitive disadvantage for an independent shop versus a dealership, right? If a dealership can go and have all of the training at their fingertips, it is a little bit more of a challenge to find that training. And even, it might require some travel, or it might require you to lose a lot of productivity over the course of a week because you're sending somebody somewhere. And as you look to introduce this new style of training that's more bite size, I think it fits our industry perfectly. And I'm curious as to how you looked at it going into it, because as you're kind of breaking down a more traditional product into how you deliver it to a modern day technician, was it as obvious as it seems now that doing it in kind of those bite-sized increments was the way to do it?
Well, I think part of this was where being from outside of this industry was beneficial to me, because when I came in and I started attending ASE meetings, TMC meetings, and so forth, I kept hearing the same concerns. Our people need training. I mean, that was the headline. The second was technician shortage, which kind of reinforces we need training. But then it was, we don't have time to train. We don't know where our folks need training. And all of these concerns I would just hear over and over, and I just kind of paused for a sec and said, well, hey, isn't there another way to do this? Why don't we do something that is a little more accessible, that is a little more flexible, that we can do in shorter pieces? And so the light bulb started to go off, and part of it was like finding the right technology. I'd say the first thing was, okay, we got to just look at this a little different way. There's a path here. And then the second part was like figuring out the technology to make sure that it was achievable. So I'd say that was part of it, that we just began to chip away at the constraints. And even now, when we talk to organizations, I mean, that the same concerns come into play. I mean, it's rare for us to speak with a shop where they say nobody on their team needs training. It is also rare for them to say it's super easy to get training for my folks, or I never think twice about, do I shut the shop down or do I send this person off site? I mean, those are difficult decisions to make. So access is really one of the primary challenges that we're trying to address, because overall we believe that the harder it is for you to get that training, whether it's cost or time, the less likely you are to do it. So if you're only going to make that investment once or twice a year, what are you really going to get out of it? And from a learning perspective, how much can you really absorb and retain over the long time if you're attending one course a year, as an example? And from a research perspective, there's a lot of data out there that suggests like that it's really limited. So again, we just wanted to come at it a different way, lower that barrier to entry so that you can train as frequently as you want to, make it very easy. You can do it on your phone, for example, and that begins to break those barriers down and just enable more learning, more engagement.
From a business perspective, from the shop side, I had taken over my family's independent shop that I grew up in at the beginning of the year. I'm fortunate enough to have my father still very much involved with the business, but that's one of the things that when we look at it, we know we need training, but our current staff is 4 technicians. And so if you send a training from a technician to training, you're essentially losing a quarter of your productivity every time you send somebody off. Or we had a scenario last week where we have 2 really good young technicians, and there was a training class in Madison, which is about an hour away from the shop, Madison, Wisconsin. And so we were sending them, they were working basically a full day. They were coming in at 10 a.m., so not quite a full day, but then sending them after a full day of work to a class in Madison. And the class itself was probably really, really good, but I always wonder what your mental state is going into a training where you've been there, you've been working the entire day, and then you're driving an hour, sitting through a class, and driving home the hour after that. And, how much are you retaining? And I'm sure you are retaining some, but it's probably just the maybe more Cliff Notes type stuff. Whereas with your solution, being able to do it in incremental pieces, each and every day, the consistency piece, I have to imagine drives more retention. You're doing it maybe when you're a little more fresh rather than trying to cram it all into a couple hours in a night class. And it just, from an outsider's perspective, from the shop side, it seems like such an obvious solution, right? Like something that solves a lot of problems. And it's been pretty cool to kind of see that evolution because I think we sorely need it.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, we are entirely supportive of those deeper dives of training. What we caution shops on is if that's your only path, that can be tricky. So, and I can talk more about that combination in a moment. But I think you're right. I mean, I think the the assumption you don't want to make is if somebody attends a class that they're awake enough, engaged enough, that their workday hasn't had an impact on them, the drive hasn't had an impact on them, other distractions that might be in their life hasn't impacted them, that they can sit there for an hour, 2 hours, however long it is, and absorb everything and then remember it forever and ever. That's just there's a lot of research that's been done on how adults learn, and that's just not a common outcome. So I think if we accept that and say, all right, look, I recognize that at the end of a long day, my technician is probably going to be fatigued and they have to drive an hour and they're going to cover 3 hours of material in this class. So measuring your expectations against that, I think, can be helpful. Just be realistic. I mean, put yourself in
Yeah.
that position. Like, what are you going to get out of that? And again, this is no way a criticism of that course, but just making sure that you're preparing somebody to be successful. So what we will do in those situations typically is, because along with the way our approach to training works, is it's very data informed. So we can enable a shop management team to say, yeah, we're going to send Jay to this class today because based on what's going to be covered, he's ready, which is a big part of it. Because if you go to that class and stuff's over your head or too easy for you, that has a big impact on that engagement and what you're going to get out of it. But if you're primed and you're at a good place to attend that course, that can just address one of those concerns. Sure, you could still be tired, you could have other distractions, but if we can help reduce some of those open questions and make it a little more likely that you're going to get something out of it, we think there's a good benefit to doing that.
I think you hit on a really solid point there, in that it isn't discounting the value of in-person training and the fact that we need more and more of it. It's more of a supplement in being able to bring people up to speed. Now, how do you understand where a technician is at in their knowledge base, right? If maybe you have that technician that's been in the industry for 15 years, are they still starting out as like step one electrical, or walk me through that process a little bit?
Yeah, so the solution is highly configurable. The way that we tend to do it is we rely on a shop that just comes on board to essentially direct their team, each individual towards a particular path. So whether it's more for like an A-Tech type technician or a tire tech or a service advisor, so there's different flavors. Then the system starts pushing them through training sessions, and these training sessions adapt to them, but we measure everything. So we will measure your knowledge, we'll measure how long it takes you to interact with the system, we'll prompt you for your confidence. So there's a lot of depth that we go into to understand where you are. Now, to be direct about one of your questions, is we do start everybody out at what we describe as level 1 in the platform. So the system wants to understand where you are from a foundational aspect, whether it's in ignition systems or in alignment. Now, an ATAC is going to be getting more challenging topics, but within those topics, we're going to start at level 1. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, we want to make sure that that foundation is set. And we want to make sure that if there is a gap, in that area, we can close it. And then we begin to build them up more and more. So that allows us to establish that foundation, identify any weak points. The trade-off here is it does take a little time. Again, depth of the data is really important to how this works. So we put a lot of time into setting expectations for customers to say, hey, you can't expect this to be a home run in 5 days or 2 weeks or something like that. It's going to take a little bit of time for that system to build. Now, users aren't restricted. They can go ahead and do more. However, again, we want to just be very clear that it's going to take a little time for the system to get a good understanding for you, but then over time it's going to flex and push you where you need more help.
It's Really cool. And as you're talking through this, in the back of my mind, and we do a lot with technicians in the career space, obviously, I'm listening to this and I'm like, how cool would it be to tie it to a career plan, right? If you're trying to engage a technician and trying to uplift their skills, being able to tie it to some type of career plan. And again, if you're mixing in some in-person training on top of it, you have just a better understanding of your team, where they actually need training. Maybe they're not as proficient at one area as you thought they were. And it really kind of honing in and dialing in where they need help. That might even give you a better understanding of what in-person training to send them to, right?
Yeah.
Like just being able to truly understand the person and use that to tie it in with a career plan, I think is just an awesome idea.
Yeah, and that's really where we try to support our customers to use that data, because the system will show you. You could see for one of your technicians that maybe they're great here, here, and here, and there's plots, there's data, there's lots of ways to view it. Some people would describe it like more of like a baseball card kind of stats on the back end. It's available on your phone and all that. But if you can take some of the data that's there and you say, okay, Jay is really strong in these areas, but this one, he's a little weaker. His confidence is a little lower. The system is working him on that. It's focusing on that. But now if I have a conversation with him and we go through some of these examples and we go through some of these concepts, now we've got something tangible to talk through and to revisit. So if we talk through this concept, this use case, this scenario today, and you feel a little bit better about it, the system is going to keep pushing you. But then in 2 weeks, you can look at the data as a manager as well and be like, yeah, he's moving along, or you can recheck with them. So it just provides another dimension in which to support them. Because a lot of times, particularly with the more traditional modes of training, you've got this one test that this person did, maybe 2 months ago. But does that give you an understanding of where they are today? And that's what our system does. Like all of the data that we talk about in terms of knowledge, we call it their current score. So where are they right now, which allows you to then act on that.
That is so great. I love that. As you're talking, I just keep thinking through different scenarios in my own head and ways that you could use that data in being able to enhance the skill set of somebody. I'm interested in learning. Is it about trying to uplift their weak points or strengthen what they're already good at? And I know I've read books on this in the past about, training to your, leveraging your strengths and continuing to leverage them and not worrying about the weaknesses. But then I've read others where they're saying, you can make yourself a more rounded individual by training on those weaknesses. What advice do you have there? Or can you give us some insight as to how today's class works in that scenario?
Yeah, so it's a blend of priorities is really where it starts off. So again, and what an ATEC or an advisor versus a tire tech might need to know is different. And again, we have kind of general settings for that, but then shops can ultimately set their own specifics for what's important to them. So let's say, for example, it's very important for me, the way my settings are, that I'm supposed to be very knowledgeable in topic A, B, and C. So that's most important for me. And then maybe at a second tier, there's, other topics that are important, but not as important as those three. And the way the system will really behave is that if I'm really strong in A and B and weaker in C, the system's going to focus on that, but it's temporary, right? Because it's not like it recognizes that if it's going to teach me more about concept C, that it needs to teach me and then needs to give me a little bit of time before it revisits it, because we're really trying to drill this into your long-term memory. And if we keep hitting that day by day by day, then you're just got that more like, I did this yesterday, so it's a little more fresh. But if we focus on this and then we wait 10 days and we come back at you again and you demonstrate that you have that knowledge, that gives the system a greater degree of confidence that, yes, that's sunk in. Or if I don't have it, the system can say, nope, still doesn't have it. Let's kind of dive back in. So it's kind of alternating on that based on a number of factors, when you last saw it, which we call recency, how long you took to answer it, your confidence, how you are related to other concepts. So there's a lot of depth, that the algorithms go through to try and determine that. But ultimately, for items A, B, and C, it's trying to push up your knowledge and push up your confidence on it as high as they can possibly go.
Technicians, have you checked out WrenchWay yet? WrenchWay is a free online community for automotive and diesel professionals. Whether you're looking for a job or not, WrenchWay makes it easy to explore new opportunities, stay up to date on what's going on in the automotive and diesel communities in your area, and helps improve and promote the technician profession. Check out all of the job details you care about before you apply or interview with WrenchWay Top Shops. Details like photos of the shop and answers to the questions you actually care about instead of the same old copy and paste job description you see everywhere else. Open to new job opportunities but don't want to apply yet? Create an anonymous reverse job post and let shops reach out to you and see what's going on with the industry in your area through WrenchWay's Shop Talk. Join the WrenchWay online community for free by visiting wrenchway.com or by downloading the WrenchWay mobile app. Link is in the show notes. How does this work in terms of like longevity, right? Say if you're doing it, you're a part of today's class as a technician for 10 years. Does it just keep evolving in what type of content you're getting? Or is there a ceiling to how far you can go? Is it something where you can just keep going forever? Or is there a limitation there?
Yeah, so there's really not an end to the internet, because in this case here, the from an adult learning perspective, there's this concept of the forgetting curve. You will forget knowledge over time if you're not using it, if you're not being challenged with it, and so forth. So there's the other side of the equation where we have to have enough content to kind of keep things going. We couldn't just teach you 3 things and keep you engaged forever. So to be clear, there's a balancing act there. But we know that people will start forgetting things over time. So the idea, theoretically, that you would need to continue to reinforce it over time. So that's the term that we use a lot, reinforcement. Now, in parallel, we're continuing to add content. We're refining content. So things are changing. So orgs that have been with us for some time, they've seen additional content, additional features, additional capabilities that come online. But yeah, there's not really an endpoint that we forecast for our customers. So again, that's the other reason that when we speak to them, we want to be very clear about how this works. This is a long-term game. We are not going to promise you the sun, moon, and stars after 10 weeks. But we see it all the time where somebody's been on the platform for a year or more, and the system comes back to check with them on this thing that they've struggled with. And we'll see something where they're like, yep, I still got it. They're very happy. Or they might say, dang it, that's that one thing. It's come back again. That one thing that haunts me and comes back, and I got to revisit it. I got to get back in there because I haven't done it in some time, and I've slipped a little bit. And that will vary based on user, based on settings, and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's ultimately the answer to the question, is that it does keep going.
I love that. And I think there's a lot of value in just staying fresh on things, right? Even if it's something you've learned in the past. I think as I get older, I see that where you're forgetting things that maybe you wouldn't have in the past. And so just being able to have a refresher, and I think it helps from a confidence standpoint as you get longer in your career, that maybe there is something you haven't focused on in a while, but you still want to keep your skills in tip-top shape. The other piece to this is that the technology in our industry is not slowing down, and a lot of the things that we need to learn are evolving, and it starts with that core level, if it's electrical or just mechanical in general, but then being able to build off of that foundation and be able to keep up with things. I think that's one of the major concerns amongst both independents and dealers right now, is that technology is coming at such a fast pace that it's really hard to have a game plan on how to stay up with everything. And I think it keeps a lot of shop managers up at night, because you have to balance the old technology and the old vehicles. I think the average age of a vehicle right now is like 13 years old. But along with this new stuff that's coming, whether it's EV or hydrogen, or, name your alternative fuel, it's one of those things that I don't see ever slowing down, and it's just going to continually advance at such a rapid pace that I think it stresses a lot of people out.
Yeah, and that's from our view, like the way that we intend to support that is for our customers, it requires essentially this daily routine where they're doing a little bit of daily training. Our job is to continue to bring more content, more capabilities, and so forth in there. So if you can just keep doing what you're doing, we'll fold it in. You could compare that to something like an update on your iPhone or your Android, right? You don't need to worry about the latest security updates. It's going to come in automatically. You just got to make sure that you're allowing that to happen. So we're trying to follow that similar mold, and people will feel it over time. They'll start to say, "Whoa, this is new," or "This has changed." We had a pretty significant update to some of our, I believe, it's our brake fluids training earlier this year. We've got a capability within the platform where users can provide feedback and kind of challenge what we have in there, and that happened, and it led to some research from our content team to dig in and say, whoa, okay, there's some standards here that we need to kind of refresh how we're positioning that. And we didn't release a whole new topic. We just kind of fixed the underlying piece, and then boom, we started pushing that out, and we started getting identifying a lot of gaps that people, maybe they learned this some time ago, but the facts on the ground changed. And by just deploying that, thousands of people are now able to actively do that. They didn't need to go attend a course. They didn't need to sign up for anything. They didn't need to have the instinct to go seek it out. It just came to them. So that's part of the benefit here. If we can do our job and make sure that we're staying on top of it, and then from the shop's perspective, that they can just drive that engagement from their team, make sure they're logging in consistently, we can help address those challenges and help them stay ahead of the curve on those items.
I have to imagine that is a really nice thing from a leader's standpoint, in that you've got such a natural product to push the boundaries on, right? Like to constantly challenge your team to innovate and to get better, and to see, that there's no end game to it, right? Like you just keep adding more and more. And the more you can push that educational side, and knowing that you're probably never finished there, right? Like you're just constantly pushing to that next level. It's got to be somewhat exciting for you as a leader, because it kind of inherently provide that vision that seems pretty obvious from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited, and it's fun because it's changing things a bit, and it doesn't resonate with everybody. I mean, there's definitely, I would say that the biggest challenge that I think shops have in working with today's class is this idea of this consistent training, because you're essentially trying to create a habit for everybody on your team, which is certainly easier said than done. There's got to be buy-in from the management level and understanding what they get out of it and how they're going to use that data and how they're going to tie that to whether it's raises, assigning folks to training and so forth. There's got to be some other things wrapped around it. But for those that it clicks with, there's a lot of things that you can do with it. Another one that comes up pretty regularly is this concept of bay chatter. Because, Jay, if you and I do our training together side by side, and you get something on this and I get something on that, we talk about it. And from an adult learning perspective, that is gold, because now it's gone from, out of this device here, and now it's a conversation between you and I. And you might share something about a vehicle that you serviced at one point, and now that's going to help stick with me. So it's all about memory and retention and kind of this additional context here. So there's a lot of shop level engagement capabilities in there that not all, but many shops benefit from, where it just becomes part of their culture, and they're able to use, whether it's knowledge or there's a rewards points function in the platform and an actual rewards capability in the platform where they can have some fun with it too. But for those that take advantage of those features, I think the benefits they get are pretty strong.
I agree. And as you're talking about the management side of it, I do see the need from the leadership team to buy in, because if they don't, it might become an afterthought, or if those numbers aren't being brought up in your one-on-ones, or if you're not having visibility to it, maybe you forget about it. And not in a bad way, just more so like everybody, it has a million things going on, and it can be something that is hard to stay in front of. But I think the more you talk about it and the more you do actually go back and review, results with somebody and talk to them about it. You talked about bay chatter, but I think that conversation that you have in that one-on-one becomes a lot more productive if that's top of mind, because if you are going off of something tangible that you can discuss and, hey, I see you're struggling with this. Is there anything that I can do to help you out with this? Like just being able to have that conversation in an open and honest way where, from my perspective, I think you can maybe approach that the wrong way too. If you're that manager that's going out and scolding your people because they didn't get it right, you're probably just kind of creating this almost this weird type of communication. But if you take the mindset, and this isn't just in regard to today's class, but more so just the leadership principle in general, like if you're truly caring about your people and you want to see them do better, that resonates with technicians. And, that's one of the things we hear a lot back from our survey data on, is that there are a lot of technicians that don't necessarily love their bosses. And a lot of it comes down to how they communicate. And so here you've got a tool to be able to actually have a productive conversation with your team that is helping them grow and isn't just a check the box thing. It's, hey, we're trying to get better as a team here. What can I do to help you? So if you approach that conversation in the right context and the right tone, I think you can make a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what that reminds me of one recent conversation we had with a shop owner who said the feedback that he had received was that he wasn't very good with one-on-one conversations. And he acknowledged, he's like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't have it just doesn't come naturally to me, which I think all of us can probably relate to that one way or another. There's some things I'm good at, some things I'm not. But where we were able to help him, it was like this view for each employee. This is just, it's kind of like a starter. This will get you up and running. Here's a couple data points that you can review for this meeting. But then also now that gives you something to set up for the following meeting. So, hey, you're at 78% in this area, suspension systems, and you're doing a lot of that work for us. So do me a favor. Over the next week or so, take a little more training on that. Let's see if we can get that up to 85. Write that down. Next meeting comes up. Hey, you're at 85. Great. Let's take the next step. Let's go further. Or you're not there yet. So what happened? Did you not have time? Like, again, it's sometimes just getting the ball rolling in that little bit of structure. So in that approach could be used, with our data, obviously, SMS data and so forth, lots of different ways to do it. But I do think from a learning perspective, having something tangible to go on gives somebody something to work with. We've heard, a lot of folks describe, when it comes to like ASE certifications, like somebody has this cert, but like, I don't know if they're, how strong they really are there, or is there a gap, whether it's related to they passed it and there were things that they didn't know, or maybe they certified 2 years ago. There's just a little bit of that context that they might need more of to take some action on.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And as you're talking, gave me some ideas. We actually have out on WrenchWay a sample agenda for our clients, right? So like if they want to do one-on-ones, a sample of agenda of what to talk about, that would be an easily added thing to that agenda, is not just to talk about training, but let's talk about the actual data that we got from that training and have, an open conversation. And similar to what you just said there, I've talked to so many managers over the years that are uncomfortable in those types of conversations. And I think a lot of times the reason they're uncomfortable is because they're unprepared going into those meetings. Like they'll sit down and just kind of off the cuff, how are things going?
Right.
And not really have a point to the meeting. And so if you're going down, and I think the more you can kind of set the tone that we're doing these meetings to help you improve as an individual, to improve as a technician, to just to improve as a person, it will resonate, and it seems like you're on the same team then, rather than trying to fight against each other and what you're trying to accomplish. So as you're talking about that and that story, I mean, it resonated with me big time, because I think that's something a lot of our managers in this industry could learn from, and just making those one-on-ones more productive. Adding training as a key component to that is a huge thing.
Well, and it's sometimes interesting, because when you think about the way a shop is supporting their customer, right? I mean, they're measuring things, they're capturing things. They're not just saying, well, hey, what's wrong, right? We're going to do an inspection. We're going to check all these things and see where we are. If we see this issue, we're going to talk about it. Same idea. You know, if you go into your one-on-one, like, hey, how are things going? Vehicle drives fine. You know, okay, well, what do we do with that? So again, I think some of these things are, I think one thing that we realized is that when it came to automotive training, there was just kind of some legacy assumptions about how it would work, how often we need to refresh, and that we maybe didn't need to measure things at a great level of detail. And I think part of that's just the way that we all came up through school and stuff like that, right? We take a geometry class, we get a B, we move on. We never think about it again, right? Until maybe we have to go take something else, you know, down the road, and it relates to it, but we kind of out of sight, out of mind. But I think if you consider any other skills or knowledge, think about how you try to keep it fresh. Think about, if you never did it again, how good will you be 6 months down the road? I mean, people are golfers, for example. You know, it's wintertime, you come back, are you going to be great? You know, the first time you go out, probably not. You know, so that sort of repetition, routine, reinforcement is translatable to anything. We're just trying to take it, you know, to this, you know, automotive aftermarket knowledge perspective and make it easier to get, because reinforcing it is again not necessarily the thing that just happens automatically. We got to find some way to deliver that and make that very accessible to the audience.
You mentioned earlier the expectations of a technician coming out of training, and how at points it can be fairly unrealistic. I point to early technicians, or technicians that are just starting off in their career, and maybe they went to tech school and they're coming out, and a lot of times we'll see the scenario play out to where maybe that technician isn't producing in 3 months or 4 months out of tech school, and the shop manager's getting a little frustrated with the person that they're not just getting it, right? And I've heard this from people that will also tell me, yeah, it's going to take us 2 to 3 to 4 years to get this person up to speed. Yeah, in the back of their mind, they're like, oh, I'm just frustrated. I can't get this, can't get this person to understand it. And I think it's one of the biggest issues in our industry, because we don't manage our expectations and what we think a new technician is going to produce. And that could be the same thing here too, right? Where you might get air conditioning training and the person doesn't get it right off the bat, or you might get some other thing. And in some cases, like I go back to my own upbringing and going to tech school, and I'll stick on that air conditioning example. We went through an air conditioning class, got certified in air conditioning. I didn't touch anything air conditioning for another 2 years from there. So trying to remember and going back through my textbooks from school to be able to even understand what it was that I was doing again happened because I wasn't fresh on it, right? And I learned that one topic a couple of years before I actually even touched that system. So it can be really easy to forget that. And I think a lot of times we expect maybe that trade school to be the be all end all, that, they're going to come out and they're going to just be great right off the bat. And a lot of times, because our expectation is that way, we have an issue with attrition with young technicians. ASE Education Foundation, we talk about this stat a lot, that 42% of technicians are out of the industry within the first couple of years they're in it. And so we have this huge attrition rate. And really, I think a lot of it comes down to expectations, and for us as shops not having the patience level that we need in order to get that person up to speed. And it's kind of the same thing here, right? Just because they take some courses doesn't mean they're magically going to become a great technician, but if they're doing it consistently and learning the principles that they should in a way that is a little deeper, and who knows, maybe then they're actually seeing what they're being trained on fairly soon after they actually learn it. I think there's some level of stickiness to that side too. So all of that just to say, we have to manage our expectations a little better. Otherwise, we're just going to keep this attrition going, and we just can't afford that as an industry.
Yeah, I think from the traditional educational approach, which high school, tech school, college, there's been this general view. Well, if you graduate with this, there's a assumption that you know it and can apply it. And I think if most people think about that critically, they might question, okay, do I really buy that? Again, I know if you're kind of acquiring that product, that student from that school, that's what you want. But I do think, again, challenging that a bit, is important. And I think everybody can probably relate to the scenario that you just described. I go through this course, I guess I learned this thing, I got the certificate, but how well do I really know it? So I think that's one piece of it. The other thing I think that it's worth folks considering is knowledge and competency is dynamic, right? It's not like this stuff gets planted in your brain and it stays forever. You got the full segment of it, and it's going to stay in there locked in a box forever. I mean, maybe you got 80% of it, and maybe that starts to fade, and the way it fades for you is different than for me. So I think we recognize that our knowledge, our memory is dynamic. It will change as we age. It will change based on different factors that we have going on in our life. Just acknowledging that that's a moving target, I think, is important to figure out then how to address it. Because if you accept that it's dynamic, then it's really difficult to address it with just a very static approach to it. And again, I know that's maybe a little abstract, but I think generally speaking, if people recognize, again, we can probably all relate to what we know today is a little different. We probably forgot some things that we knew 5 years ago, whether it's a song, a recipe, a thing that we used to do. That applies to what we do for work as well. And if you're coaching and supporting people, that's probably how their brains are as well. And that might allow you a little more wiggle room, I guess, to try and have a productive conversation with that person, and then begin to figure out where they need it and begin to plug those holes or figure out where to push them next.
I also think it ties really nicely in. I see a lot more shops starting to have maybe a shop foreman position or mentor type of role within a shop. And I think, again, kind of pulling all of this together, if you're having those one-on-one conversations and you're seeing the data of what the technician is being trained on, you're able to then, I see a natural path to say, okay, you just learned on this. We have a job coming in 2 days that's, directly related to this training. We're going to put you on it. If you're not comfortable with it, let's get you to work on that with somebody else in the shop, because now you've got that base level of training. And I think the actual application of it in the shop could be so effective if we handle that scenario right? Like if we tie them with a mentor to actually walk through the process with them, then some of the education they got is tied to real world application. I think your chances of success would be greatly increased there.
Oh, I agree, and that's part of, I think, the challenge for these shops is to kind of juggling a million things, right? That's the ideal world, and the more available we can make that data and that communication, the more likely we are to have that happen. I don't know if that is an easy thing for anybody to
Yeah.
do, but the less information we have at our fingertips, I mean, you've got no shot at it. So that's part of what we're trying to do, at least in terms of like our piece of the puzzle here, make that information available, try and have it top of mind both for the employee and the manager to ideally make that a more likely outcome. But it does kind of take that planning and that foresight, which requires a shop to embrace this way of looking at things. Again, not just what we do, but generally speaking, I want to develop my people. And you can't just snap your fingers and develop a staff. It takes work, and not everybody is cut out to be that type of a manager. Some folks are great at it, others aren't, and sometimes it's trying to figure out how you balance your strengths and weaknesses to try to enable that for your staff.
Now, I kind of want to shift gears here a little bit to talk about some of the non-technician training opportunities that you have. I believe you have opportunities for managers and service advisors. What does training look like on that side?
Yeah, so the experience is similar. So the way we would describe it is just our core content library. So technicians is where we started. Then we moved into service advisors, where there's a blend of more communication and people skills training, but also with technical training that is built for service advisors, so that they can understand various systems and components, terminology, and better enable them to communicate with the customer, better enable them to communicate with the technicians, and complementing that with, again, whether it's communication barriers, listening and questioning techniques, and so forth. So we tend to hear one of two stories. Somebody that's got a great deal of experience in dealing with customers, so maybe they were in another customer-facing role, outside of the aftermarket, and then they moved in, and the system will detect it pretty quickly, and it'll be like, okay, we need to focus on the technical aspects here. And we've gotten some really good feedback from folks that would say, look, I was intimidated by talking to customers. I didn't feel comfortable, and this has helped me. Now I know enough to be dangerous here. May not go too far here, but now I've got an easy way, a convenient way for me to build up some of this knowledge. On the other hand, we sometimes have techs that have moved to the counter, and the communication skills are areas where, like, oh, I never thought about like what this means when the way a communication barrier could be, a physical barrier, emotional barrier, whatever it is, or having some empathy and some of those things. And then we actually have some customers that are blending those. We've got some folks that are blending like advanced technical training with the people skills, because they're trying to take their lead techs and kind of develop them to be a little more easier to work with in terms of the communication styles. So that's the service advisor area, and then management is an area that we began expanding into earlier this year. And a lot of that, the initial phases of that are geared more around like financial reporting and teaching people, how to understand various reports, acronyms, and so forth. But we've got some bigger plans to get into that. Really, we want to make sure that we're supporting every role under the roof. Parts specialist is one that we don't really have anything for just yet, but that's on the radar as well. So that's really kind of how we've evolved. But for each area, we continue to try and grow them, throughout the year.
I give you a lot of credit for opening up that path, because that is another weakness of our industry, is putting people that have no training into a position that we need, right? And maybe they desire, if that technician wants to move up front, a lot of times we just throw them in the seat and become frustrated when they don't know what they're doing, right? They might have been a really, really good technician. We see that on the management side a lot, right? Where a great technician goes into a manager's seat, struggles because it's a different job, it's a different skill set, it's a different mindset. And being able to have something where, again, you tie it back to a career path. And if that technician wants to get up front at some point, well, now you've got some training to introduce to them and some ability to do it at a more gradual level than just throwing them to the wolves when you bring them up to the office. And I really, really appreciate that you guys are doing that, because I think it is sorely needed. I think it's a big reason why we have a lot of technician unhappiness that we do, is because we aren't properly training managers and service advisors, and it creates a lot of frustration across the board. And being able to kind of implement this is a game changer to me. It really, really is.
Well, I think it goes back to something you said a few minutes ago, expectations, right? So if I'm moving this person from being a tech to the counter, do I just expect, because they're very knowledgeable in every system, that they're going to be good with my customers? Again, that's an expectation you got to be really, really careful of. So I think it all comes back to a lot of that, and just kind of being aware of those things. So, if that's my expectation, I might want to validate that. I might want to observe them with customers. I might want to gauge them before I make that switch. Like, what do you know about this? How would you handle this situation? Just to make sure that they're better prepared for a good customer experience.
What do you see out of the best shops that use this? Is there a common component to the ones that really succeed, that might, we might be able to pull some best practices out of in how they use it or how they implement it? What do you see?
So the foundational piece of it is creating consistent usage. Um, this platform, you could compare it to a gym membership. It's a monthly subscription. If you pay for this and your team rarely uses it, it's like having a gym membership and going to work out once a month. Just not a good use of your money. So we discourage that. Where we start with is how can we incorporate this as a part of your routine? How can you articulate to your team what's in it for them? Why are you asking them to do this? What's the benefit to them? Is that, hey, it's just continuous improvement, or it's a raise, or we're going to have incentives? I mean, there's got to be some story. So there has to be this foundational piece of why we're doing this. One of the most effective ones we've seen in the past few months is actually a relatively large group, and they are heavily reliant on TIA's CTS certifications for tire safety. And basically they incorporated it and said, look, the way that you're going to get raises and get promoted is through these various certifications. But we are not sending you to get these certifications until you demonstrate that you have the knowledge and that you're using this consistently. Very simple rule, very easy to follow, and their usage rates are off the charts. And it's not a complicated thing. So I'd say that's the first part. But then we have shops that really take it to a whole nother level. Ones that are very good about using the data for one-on-ones and coaching. Others that go more of like the engagement route, and they use things like the rewards points in the platform or competitions and so forth to like celebrate their team, recognize them, give them incentives, connect it to things like tool bonuses and so forth. So that's like just the second gear. That can't happen unless they've established that consistent usage. So once you've got that locked in, you've got a lot of different paths to go down, whether it's communication, recognition, competition, rewards, and so forth.
I think as you're talking, there's so many different opportunities that are out there. I think I was reading there's some level of ASE preparation as well, being able to get somebody ready for their ASE tests. I just think doing it in the fashion that you're doing it, and it's different and unique, and I think it's really, really sorely needed in our industry. So I really hope all of you that are listening go out, check out the website, check out everything that they're doing, because they're doing some amazing things and some things that I do think will help your retention rates. I think they'll help your ability to recruit new technicians because your current team will be more satisfied. And again, I think when you have those technicians on your team and they have that thirst for knowledge, which we saw come back on our Voice of Technician survey last year, that was a huge, huge factor in a technician's happiness, is how much access they have to education and training. You're going to have a happier team, and I think just a more evolved team that really understands the current landscape. So my compliments to you, the entire team at today's class. Everything that you guys are doing is very, very innovative, and I'm a huge, huge fan.
Well, appreciate it. A lot more work to go, but we're having a good time. Certainly growing, and we're learning from our customers each day. So it's given us a good opportunity to grow, and appreciate you giving us some time to connect today.
Yeah, hope to do it again at some point in the future. This was a lot of fun, and look forward to the next one.
Thanks so much, Jay. Appreciate it.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you liked this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, did you know Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team? WrenchWay is an online community dedicated to promoting and improving automotive and diesel careers. We help technicians find the best shops to work at, and we also help auto, diesel, and CTE instructors get more support from local industry. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com.